All right, good morning, everyone. Um, just a quick camera check and audio check. You can see the shared screen. You can hear me. Uh, if everything seems to be going good, thank you. I was looking for a little affirmation there. Um, okay, so um, the first exam window opens tomorrow at midnight. We'll be open all day Thursday, all day Friday. So your expectation is to take the exam sometime Thursday or Friday. It will close at 11:59 on Friday. So make sure you've allowed yourself plenty of time to be done before that point. Um, Also, uh, I saw that the Respondus uh, quiz that I had set up for you, that the Respondus may not have been working when y'all were taking that quiz to make sure that your Respondus browser was working. Um, so I would encourage everyone today to go hit that quiz again and make sure that your Respondus browser is set up correctly and ready to test tomorrow. Uh, or as soon as either tomorrow or Friday, whatever you're going to do it. But go hit that under the start here part, right, of the Blackboard. Um, you remember you get into your system, you start the Respondus browser, you don't start your regular browser. It will take you to the ACC class. You will log into Blackboard through the Respondus browser, and it will take you um, so that you can then take the quiz, and then you'll do once that that's working right, you'll be good to go for tomorrow or Friday whenever you test, and that the Respondus won't be a problem for you and won't cost you any time while you're trying to get the exam done. Um, I will reiterate that if you need IT help during the exam, you'll need to contact the ACC help desk. They're the ones that will help you with IT issues. Um, you can certainly text me real quick if you want. I will be traveling some tomorrow, so I will not be as available uh, at the drop of the hat as I usually am. So just so you know, but yeah, make sure you get in there and make sure that that Respondus browser, is working the way it's supposed to while you've got time before you want to test. Okay, so we're going to finish chapter 3 today. And as I said on Monday, the exam is set up now for chapters 1, 2, and 3. 4 will be pushed off to the second unit. If you've already taken your chapter 4 quiz, the points will get in there. And if you haven't, don't worry about it. I'll move after the window closes. I'll move chapter 4 quiz into the new unit, so you can do it there if you haven't already. So you'll have all the time you need to get chapter 4 done. Don't worry about that now if you haven't done it. Okay, so let's get back to lecture. On Monday, we were talking about the different types of legislative committees here in Austin at the Capitol, and what they do. And we had um, talked our way down to getting to special committees. I just want to tell you that sometimes they will be also called ad hoc committees or select committees. The legislature uses the terms as they want to. Special is the term they use most of the time, but any three of those are referring to the same thing. Um, it is a committee that is created to address a specific issue. Something has come up um, that is needing the legislature's attention and needs it fairly quickly, um, or is a problem that's going to need research and development and before the next um, legislative session, because the belief is there will need to be legislation to solve the problem that they're going to be looking at. These special committees are given a timeline for how long that committee stands. And it's going to be less than a biennium, right? So it's not a standing committee. So it'll be given 6 months or a year or something like that. And during that time frame, its job is to focus on whatever the topic, the specific issue was that the committee was created around. So I'll give you an example. Just north of Waco on I-35 is a city called West. If you travel I-35 north toward Dallas or Hillsboro, you go through West every time. And what might draw your eye there is that you've got kolaches, Lone Star Kolache and another kolache shop on both sides of the highways, right? So you can get your Czech pastries there, and I encourage you to. They're very good. Years ago, I agree, Morgan. Years ago, this would have been probably 2013, maybe 2011. There was an explosion in the city of West on the east side of West Texas. And it was a massive explosion, right? It was an explosion that registered on Richter scales, right? But it wasn't obviously an earthquake. And the first thought from everybody was this is some kind of terrorist event, right? That this large explosion went off. It damaged hundreds of buildings, blew lots of windows out. I believe it killed a few people. It injured quite a few people. Legislature's in session when this happens, and one of the first things they're worried about is what happened here, what's the problem, and so they let the emergency crews get in there and do their bit. And what comes out from the emergency crews investigation and is that there was a warehouse on the east side of town that was being used to store fertilizer, and it had a large amount of fertilizer in it, and somehow or another that sparked off, and fertilizer is quite the accelerant for an explosion. And so this huge explosion occurred. And it was apparent to the legislature that this was a surprise to most of the folks in the city, certainly a surprise to the state. And the question was, how is it that such an explosive storage area was so close to town? And the answer, as it turned out, was that when it was made a storage area for fertilizer for farmers and such there, it was not close to town. Essentially, it had been there long enough that the town had grown out toward it and put it into a position that made it dangerous. And the question the legislature asked was, well, if this is the case here, how many more of these do we have in the state? And what do we need to do to both identify those potentially dangerous situations, come up with solutions to rectify this issue if they are, right? These storage areas are close to populated areas. And then how do we maintain and look over this issue going forward? So they created a special committee, and that special committee's job was to get all this information together, put it into a useful report, and submit it to the legislature as a whole prior to the next legislative session, because almost certainly this is going to need some kind of legislative work, as some law to address this issue. And this is a very kind of typical reasoning behind why you would create a special committee, right? Something that is not a routine problem, not a routine issue for the legislature, comes up on their radar, has to be researched and studied and then brought back to the legislature. And so they'll create this committee, they'll assign folks to it and tell them, hey, this is your job. You got 6 months or a year or whatever, go out and get all the facts that we're going to need in case we need to make legislation the next session or something. So most of the time, these special committees are serving during the time when maybe the legislature's in session and maybe the legislature's not in session. So they could be right either one, depending upon what the legislature, when the legislature decides to make them start. Does this make sense? That takes us to our next type of committee, and that's an interim committee. So when we started talking about the types of committees, the first committee we talked about was a standing committee. And the definition for a standing committee is a committee that is created by the legislature and it stands for the duration of the session, which is 2 years. Interim committees are another time-based committee. They're committees that are created to work during the interim of a legislative session. The interim of a legislative session is the period when the legislature is not in regular session. You'll remember that in a biennium, the legislature's regular session starts usually the second Tuesday of January and goes for 140 days. And then the session reaches what we call sine die, which is the end of the session, and they close down. So an interim committee would be given a task, and its timeline would be specifically after the legislature had left and closed down and left, was no longer in regular session, and it would work for as long as it had been given a timeline or until the end of the biennium. Again, an interim committee is probably going to be studying issues to bring prospective legislation to the next session. So that previous type of committee we just talked about, a special committee, an ad hoc committee, right? They could be also an interim committee. It just depends upon when they're created and how long their timeline is. So these categories of committees are not exclusive, right? They can be both an interim committee and a special committee. They can be a standing committee and a joint committee, right? Which is our next type of committee. A joint committee, the definition of it is very, very easy. It is simply any committee that is created by the legislature that has both members of the House and members of the Senate on it at the same time. These are the exception, not the rule, right? Most committees are either House committees or they're Senate committees. Joint committees are both. And there are certain circumstances that routinely need members from each chamber serving on the same committee. And so joint committees happen quite often, right? You're always going to have, as I have here on the slide, an LBB, joint committee, which stands for the Legislative Budget Board, which is one of the most important committees of the legislature. And as the title tells you, their job is to focus on the budget. And they have so much work to do that not only do they need this committee around, and it's a standing committee, so they need it around all the time, they also don't want to have to spend a lot of time working out differences between a House bill and a Senate bill before it can go to the governor. So they have the House and Senate, House members and Senator members on the committee together to solve issues with the budget, to promote solutions to budget issues, and ideally with both members from both chambers on there, they will be putting out reports or legislation or decisions as needed that have the backing of both chambers at the same time, and it will speed their problem solving up. So again, any committee that has members of the House and the Senate on it is going to be a joint committee. That's all that we're talking about there. A specific type of joint committee that we have gets created quite often in the legislature is a conference committee. A conference committee is a joint committee, so it has House members and Senate members on it, and it has a very specific task. When the legislature is considering legislation, quite often you're going to see it work through the House. A piece of legislation will work through the House first. The House will do all of their work, and out of the House will come a bill that they've crafted, and they will then send that over to the Senate, and the Senate will take that bill and run it through their committee process and all of their work. And what comes out of the Senate might have changed from what the House submitted to them. So the House submits their bill, the Senate takes it, and they start working on it. They have different concerns, different issues maybe, and they change the bill. Well, now you've got a House bill that's been voted on that says A, B, and C, and you've got a Senate bill that maybe says B, C, D, and E. You've got to come to some kind of compromise on what this is going to say, because you can only send one bill to the governor for signature, right? And so that means the House and the Senate need to get on the same page and write this bill out with exactly the same language on each side. That's the job of a conference committee. When the bill is passed in the House and the Senate and there's difference between those, then these conference committees, which have usually members of the Senate that worked on the committee in the Senate on this bill, and House members that worked in the committee on the House bill, right? So you've got people that have worked on both of their versions of the bill, come together in this joint conference committee to hammer out a solution that both houses, both chambers can agree to. When they're done with that, when they've got some kind of agreement that's working between them, it still has to run back to both of the House and the Senate. But usually, if the conference committee is saying, "Hey, this is good," then it's probably going to move forward, and at that point, eventually become enrolled and sent off to the governor for their consideration. Okay, so let's follow that up a little bit and talk about how legislation becomes law. One of the primary jobs, although not the most important function of the legislature, is to pass legislation. Remember, its most important function is representation, but most of its daily work when its legislature is in session is they're working on new legislation, trying to build it up, having debate, having amendments, and then putting out new legislation. It is a long and complicated process. This chart here, and there are several online that you can look at as well, is a chart that takes you through the whole legislative process. It's designed to follow a bill first through the House and all of its levels of attention. And then you see that there's a black line that goes from the top left column to the top right column. That's the transition of the bill from the House to the Senate. It works its way through the Senate. Generally, what's happening here is the bill is introduced, it's read into the record, it's assigned to a committee. Committee works that bill, changes whatever they need to change to make it functional in the House. And if it comes out of the committee with approval, then it's going to get shunted over to a calendar committee in the House, which will, if the Speaker wants it to happen, we'll schedule time for it to come back to the House floor. They'll take a couple more votes and amendments on the House floor. After the third vote on it, it's considered, if it passes, considered done, and it gets shipped over to the Senate. The Senate does most of the same exact steps. I'll explain a small difference here in a little bit on the Senate side of things, but for the most part, the bill will go through the same process. And if it comes out of a Senate committee with approval, and it hasn't changed, then it will get enrolled and sent off to the governor, and the governor can decide what they want to do with it. If it has changed, then it will enter to the conference committee uh, profile, and they'll work that up to square up the language so that they have just one thing out there. Then, if both sides agree on what's been squared up, then they'll send it to the governor. The governor can sign that bill into law. The governor can veto that bill. If they veto that bill, then the legislature has the opportunity to override that veto with a supermajority vote. In a certain set of circumstances, the governor can let a bill become law without their signature. The way that works is the bill comes to the governor more than 10 days before the end of the session. The governor is supposed to have 10 days to review legislation. If the governor has that 10 days and they don't sign it, then it will become law without their signature. If the bill gets there with less than 10 days in the legislative session left, and the governor doesn't sign it, then because they didn't get their 10 full days as required, their lack of signature is an action that kills the bill. So the timeline is important for what happens to the bill if they don't sign it. If they've got more than 10 days and the governor doesn't sign it, it becomes law. If they have less than 10 days and the governor doesn't sign it, then the bill dies. And that's just to make sure that the legislature is moving along at a proper pace so that you don't get hundreds and hundreds of bills sitting on the governor's desk with just a few days left in the session. And so the legislature, of course, is well aware of this, the design. And so if they do their best to try to get there ahead of time so that the governor gets there full time. All right. Just like there were types of committees, there are types of legislative processes that you will see these terms used. And so you need to know what the terms mean. We've been talking about legislation, proposed legislation that's being worked on in the legislature. Its proper term is a bill. Any proposed law is called a bill. And the bill either becomes law or it doesn't become law. And at the point where it's worked its way through the legislature and the governor signs a bill, that bill then changes its status from bill to law. There are three types of resolutions that occur within the legislature as well. And some of these resolutions are very impactful, and some of them are comments or recognitions or changes in procedure or action for the House that it comes out of. The first type of resolution that occurs in the Texas legislature is what we call a joint resolution. And a joint resolution is used for two things. It is to propose an amendment to the Texas Constitution. Remember, we talked about in Texas, the legislature makes proposals to change the Texas Constitution, and then the voters ratify that if they want. But the ratification process is for the people. And that's what takes place on the Texas Constitution. So the joint resolution, right? And notice the word joint here. It means just like it did when we talked about joint committees. This is a resolution put forward by both the House and the Senate as a proposed amendment to change the Texas Constitution. The other place that we will see a joint resolution is If the U.S. Congress has proposed an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, one of the two ways that a um, amendment to the U.S. Constitution can be moved forward is for state legislatures to ratify them. There's also another element out there where you can have a state convention to ratify U.S. constitutional amendments, but almost always we use legislatures and state legislatures to do that. So for the state of Texas, the legislature will be issuing a joint resolution describing whether they approve the amendment to the U.S. Constitution or whether they do not, whether they ratify it or they do not ratify that amendment. So a joint resolution is going to have something to do with the Constitution, either the Texas Constitution or the U.S. Constitution. And it's, again, effort by the House and the Senate at the same time. Most resolutions that come out of the legislature are simple resolutions. It means that one chamber is issuing a resolution, some action, some recognition, some change in the way they do business. And it applies only to the chamber that issues it. So it could be a House resolution or it could be a Senate resolution, right? And it's considered a simple resolution because it only affects that one chamber. You can have a concurrent resolution where both chambers are proposing the same identical action or response, but it does not carry the force of law, right? So it's not going to be like a joint resolution that's changing a constitution, right? So in these cases, right, both simple resolutions and concurrent resolutions are actions and decisions and acknowledgments that either chamber makes or both chambers makes. They do not carry the force of law, but they can change how processes occur, how the chambers do their business. Quite often, what you'll see most of the time that comes out as either a simple or a concurrent resolution is some kind of acknowledgement for residents of Texas that have done something for the state that's noteworthy, and the legislature wants to commend them on their accomplishments, their career, whatever it is they've done, and so it generates a record and the resolution that says that, and so it's a nice thing if you get one. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the particular processes that occur in the two chambers. In this case, the calendaring function of the House and the Senate. So on the House side of things, there's a House Calendars Committee. And that Calendars Committee is to take bills that have been approved out of committees and bring them forward and schedule them on the House Calendars Committee, on the House calendar, for the House floor to consider, to take a second or a third vote. The reason this is an important step is because in the House, if your bill does not get scheduled on the calendar, it will never be brought forward for a vote. So you can have a bill introduced, read into the record, voted on to be sent to the committee. Committee does all its work on this bill, gets a piece of legislation that it likes, approves that to go to the floor for a vote, sends it to the House Calendars Committee. And if they don't find a slot for it, or if the Speaker of the House tells them not to find a slot for it on the calendar, that bill's never going to make it back to the floor for a vote, and it dies. Pretty straightforward process. Also, again, highlighting the power of the Speaker of the House in determining what legislation can move forward. On the Senate side of things, they handle, because they're so much smaller, 31 people, they handle their internal procedures and calendaring a little different. So the first thing that you have to understand is that when the Senate comes into session, they have this peculiar procedure where they have a nonsense bill. They usually refer to it as a bottleneck bill. And they vote that into discussion on the Senate floor. The rules of Robert's Rules of Order, right, as it applies to this kind of interaction and discussion of a bill that's on the floor, require you to continue discussing this bill unless you can set it aside and do other business if you have a big vote, right? Usually a supermajority vote. The Senate puts this bottleneck bill into play to act as an artificial barrier to divisive pieces of legislation making it to the Senate floor. So the first thing they do after they put this bottleneck bill in there that stops any floor votes from happening is that they establish the Senate Administrative Committee, right? One of those ones that's going to stand for a biennium. And they're going to let it schedule non-controversial bills. And so all of the Senate legislators know that if a bill gets scheduled from the Senate Administrative Committee, then there's a supermajority of folks. It's non-controversial. It's going to pass. Everybody knows it's going to pass. No one's going to try to amend it, going to try to change it. It's going to be brought into the Senate floor for votes that way. Anything that comes from that committee, the Senate as a whole will take the proper Robert's Rules of Order step and vote the bottleneck bill with its supermajority to set aside and address the non-controversial stuff. That's easy. But what the bottleneck bills for controversial legislation is, it makes the senators come to some agreement ahead of time about how they're going to pass this, if they're going to pass this. And these controversial ones are put on what's called an intent calendar. So it is some senators' intent to bring this bill forward. That intent calendar is actually a notice to the senators that, hey, this bill's not a simple bill. It's not an easy bill. It's going to require us to spend time and effort and talk and debate, and there are going to probably be amendments, and there's going to be a lot of work that goes on after it has come out of the committee. And so the bottleneck bill is there, ensuring in the sense that when these controversial bills come along, the Senate will direct their time at those, and know to, because it's on this intent committee versus coming out of the Senate Administration Committee. So this is a kind of informal way of having two tracks for bills. Ones that everybody just needs to kind of pro forma take care of. They come out of the Senate Administration Committee. And then one that coming on the intent committee alerts everyone that this bill is controversial, may need more work, but has been approved by its committee, and they want to eventually try to bring it to the Senate floor. So that's how they handle bills as they come through the Senate. A much more collegial kind of approach, right? In the House, it's all up to the House Calendar Committee and the Speaker of the House, and they will bring things forward they want to, and if they don't want to, they won't. Here, right, it's much more of what you can do to support your bill, even if it's controversial. If you can get enough people to sign on to say, yes, we still want to hear this, right? So those are two different procedures that happen, one in each chamber. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about that? It can be a little confusing, so we'll clarify if I haven't given you enough there. Okay, I'm going to move on to budgeting, and you guys hit me in the chat room if I need to back up. Okay, so budgeting is one of the most, if not the most important, regularly scheduled bit of work that occurs during a legislative session. right? During that regular session, uh, you've got to generate a budget and you've got to generate appropriations that are going to let the state of Texas have the resources that it needs to do the work it's trying to do. The legislature gets to see two different budgets. Um, they get a budget from right the joint committee that I mentioned earlier, the LBB, a legislative budget board. Right, they are the senators and the House reps that are usually of seniority, have worked on many budgets in the past, know all the right processes, have the experience of building a budget. And just so you know, the budget for the state of Texas is an 800 or 900 page document, right? It's not a little bit of work, right? It's a huge undertaking every session because you're trying to lay out all of the spending that the government's going to do for the next 2 years, right? So you're trying to take all of that into consideration and come up with a budget that meets all the requirements and meets the needs of the state. The second budget the legislature gets to look at is the governor's budget. It comes out of the governor's budget office. Um, and this is a very important budget because it is a budget that's been generated by all of the executive agencies that answer to the governor. Um, and so the governor's right is looking to the bureaucratic agencies, the agencies, the commissions, right, the boards, and telling them, send me a budget right for your agency, and then the governor's office rolls all of those agency budgets up into one document, squares them up with the perspective and politics of the governor and the governor's office, and then they present this budget to the legislature. And in a real sense, the governor's budget does two things. One, it reestablishes the needs of these agencies to do their statutory work. And then two, if there have been concerns or problems or issues and they're falling short on getting their legislative work done, they will try to increase these budgets, right? They'll say, we need more people, we need more resources to get this job done. Or if there's federal legislation coming down that's going to expand their role, then those will be put into this governor's budget and sent to the legislature, and so they'll know, hey, if they're going to do all their work, they need more money. And then the legislature as a whole gets to look at both of these budgets and look at where they're trying to go, what the perspective of the executive branch is, and then out of that generate the budget that's going to get passed into legislation, become law, and fund the state of Texas. There is another element that comes into play here, and that is the constitutional requirement that Texas have a balanced budget. And this is generally a very good fiscal tool, right? It's trying to ensure that the state is not spending money that they don't and or won't have. Now, it's a little bit of a difficult issue because the legislative session is meeting right at the beginning of a January of an odd number year, and they're trying to write a budget that's going to come into law September 1st of that year and last for the next 2 years. So in that 8-9 month run up, as they're trying to do this, well, 6 months because they're going to finish it in hopefully during the regular session, they're trying to project what Texas will spend in the future, right? 2 years into the future. And that's a difficult process. Now, the comptroller of the state of Texas is the person that's in charge of taking all the money in from fees and taxes and things like that. And so that office has a role to play here. They're tapping into projected economics. They're looking at what's going on in the state of Texas and what we're producing and how many people are moving here or leaving from here. And the comptroller issues a projection based upon all of these indicators of the economy and where it's going for the next 2 years. They'll issue an estimate of the state of Texas will need, or will have, will have X amount of dollars to spend in the next 2 years. And I'm going to throw a fake number out there, right, of 100 billion. Let's just say the comptroller says we're going to bring in $100 billion through whatever processes in the next 2 years in Texas. That estimate of what's going to come in serves as the ceiling for the legislature's budget bill. In other words, when they pass this bill, it cannot exceed what the comptroller has estimated will be the income coming in. Now, there are some funds that fluctuate and some funds that are outside the budget that Texas has. Those can be brought in, and if let's say you've got a 10 billion laying around somewhere, if you have that in hand, then you can exceed the budget by the amount of money you have in hand that's not part of the budget. But for the general perspective here, what the comptroller says we're going to get for 2 years is the ceiling for the budget in Texas. And that's because we have this requirement that we keep our budget balanced. I hope that makes sense. It's a very complicated process, but we do pretty good at it. Now, obviously, no one has a crystal ball. They don't know exactly what's going to happen for the next 2 years. All kinds of things can impact the economy and can change what money comes in or doesn't come in. Right, we're in a budget right now from 2025, spending the money that was in that budget. But if you've been paying attention to the news, right, there's a possibility that the U.S. and Iran might get into a war. If that happens, one of the things that'll probably come out of that will be an immense constriction on the amount of oil traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, right? And that'll limit its availability, and the price of fuel will go up, and it will go up more than we've probably budgeted for in Texas, right? Because the state's going to be buying oil and buying gas and stuff for service fleets. It sells oil from state lands into the market. All of that will be affected, and the comptroller can't know any of that ahead of time. So we have what's called budget execution authority that allows the legislature to handle unforeseen budgeting emergencies. The first thing is we've got a constitutional amendment that we passed in '85 that says the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, if they have emergencies in the Texas budget because of something that was unforeseen, the three of them can get together and authorize moving money within the budget, right, from one category to another category to solve issues that are popping up that were unanticipated. This is a very small group. It's 3 people and their staff, but they're all the top leaders of, right, both the legislative and the executive branch of government. So you've got a representative of the House, you've got a representative of the Senate, and you've got the governor. So they all represent their parts of the legislative process and will be using that authority to move money around. Now, in the background, the Legislative Budget Board, right, that committee that has both House and Senate members on it, and this is their expertise to work on the budget, they will be engaged with, right, the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House, because they're the ones that have the expertise and have put the budget together. So when something pops up that no one could foresee or could budget for, we do have authority in place to allow, right, this group to come together in an interim, right? There's no session happening, and massage or manage the budget to try to handle what's coming up. And that might mean taking money away from some places and moving them to others. And um, that's just something that they have to work with on their in the moment. The other thing that quite often happens is just the economy contracts, and you never know that that's going to necessarily be the case. The way Texas deals with this most often is uh, they won't use budget execution authority to move money around that much. They will just the governor will tell all of the leadership of the state agencies and bureau boards and commissions to rest- restrict their budget, to give money back. To, you were appropriated $100 million. The comptrollers told us that the economy has shrunk by 10%. We're not going to get as much as we thought. So out of that 100 million, you need to take 10% out of that, right, and not spend it, right, because you're not going to get it. What that means is that the boards, commissions, and the agencies um, have to go through and figure out what the least important thing is that they're legally required to do, and then stall on that, basically, right? Just push it back. And because this command is, this directive is coming from the governor and as part of the budgetary process, that's right. They just have to make the choice. We do all of these things required by law. If we don't get the money we need in a normal budget, or if we have some kind of economic issue that shrinks the budget, here's what we will stop doing until things come back into a normal range. Quite often that means not just not doing the work, it also means letting people go, because the biggest expense, of course, at the agency level almost always is staff. And so been through at least two restrictions like that during my tenure with the state. And in both cases, I was with different agencies, but in both cases, we ended up having to let people go. And then work didn't get done. And if folks, constituents were relying upon that, we didn't have the money, and it was deemed less important. So whatever that, action was, or that's just what you have to live with. And so this constitutional balanced budget requirement, right, makes us restrict services, restrict effort and work on the state government if we don't have the funds to make it work. And that can be harsh on the people that were relying upon that, whatever it might have been, but it also keeps us more as a state financially secure. When the economy goes down, we don't spend money that we don't have coming in. And not all states approach their budgets that way. Some states do engage in fairly serious deficit spending, where they, assume that things will come around better in a few years. They'll spend money they don't really have with the anticipation that the economy will kick back up and they'll make that money back. Texas doesn't work that way. As a traditional / conservative political culture, we're much more focused on, do we have it? If we have it, we can spend it. If we don't have it, then we're going to cut services until we do get the money we need to address the issue. Does that make sense? Okay. So, any questions over this chapter or the legislature and concerns about the material here? So if not, I'm going to uh, stop this share real quick. I'm going to change this document out, and we're going to move on to chapter 4. Bear with me here as my slow computer finally gets itself uh, gets this pulled up. And then we will. Okay. You should be seeing slide one here, which is the governor. All right, so we're going to talk about the executive branch for a little bit. And just to remember, what we're about to start talking about now for the rest of the class is not on the exam that comes in tomorrow, right? This will be material will be pushed back to the second unit, second exam. Okay, so governor, the executive branch, the governor's office. The leader of the state of Texas, right? The head of the executive branch, the governor of Texas is the top political leader. It doesn't that position doesn't just lead the government. It also whatever party they belong to, they are usually the de facto leader of that state party, which means they have a lot of influence over. In this case, right, with Governor Abbott, the Republican Party, and where the Republican Party puts its resources, supporting current members of the legislature or challengers trying to get into the legislature from the Republican Party. So the governor's right, a major leader in politics within the state of Texas. That being said, while they have a good amount of power and they can lead Texas, they can lead the agencies, they have a lot of negotiation powers. One of the interesting things is that we know in relation to the powers that governors of other states have, Texas, as a result of the 1876 Constitution, Texas governors have fewer constitutional powers. Their strength is less than a lot of other states and the constitutional powers their governors have. Right? We reined our governor in 1876 when we wrote this Constitution. We took some powers away and moved them around, and we'll talk about that. But so the actual powers that they have constitutionally are restricted, but this is Texas and it's a big state with a lot of people and a large economy. And so the ability to lead the state outside of what you can do constitutionally is an immense opportunity for these folks to put their stamp on Texas history and Texas, where Texas is going in the future. So while we'll refer to them constitutionally as a weak governor, that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to impact things and get things done. So the basic structure, the basic constitutional design and such of the governor's office is pretty simple. Governor is elected in a statewide election. It is a partisan election. In other words, you're going to be as a candidate for governor coming out of a primary from one of the major parties that we have in the state that's selecting you. So it's going to be a partisan competition, statewide election. It is occurring in even numbered years when we don't have a presidential election. So presidential elections, right, at the federal level are in even numbered years. The president serves 4 years. The governor serves 4 years. So we've staggered the elections so that every 2 years in Texas, we're either going to the polls to vote for a president, or 2 years down the road, we're going to the polls to vote for a governor. But we're not doing them during the same election. And that was done intentionally, right? We set it up that way because usually the major executive offices, president and governor, bring more people out to vote. And so by splitting them up, the idea is that the general elections that occur in November of every odd number year will have more participation, right? When the president's running, obviously people will want to vote for the president. When the governor's running, the hope is that people wanting to vote for the governor will show up and vote for all of the down ticket, down ballot positions as well. So it's idea there is to keep those two generating participation. The term of office for the governors is a 4-year term. And one of the things that makes it a very desirable office to have is that there are no term limits on this executive office. If you can keep the people of Texas happy and voting for you, you can stay in the governor's office as long as you want. And we have had governors, right, 12, 14 years, right, as governor serving. I think Rick Perry served 14 years before he decided to run for federal office, right, and stepped out. And so, that's a long time to be in the executive in anybody's government. So you'll have a lot of impact over that long of a period of time. The constitutional requirements are pretty straightforward. We've got a minimum age requirement of 30 years. We've got our U.S. citizenship requirement. We have a residency requirement, right? You have to have been a Texas resident for 5 years immediately prior to your election. The idea, of course, being that we want our governors to have a feel of what Texas is and what it does and the politics in Texas, right? So any U.S. citizen that becomes a resident of Texas and is here for 5 years, provided they're 30 years old, right, and don't have anything against them as far as a felony or something like that, they're going to be able to run for governor. Once they're elected, they serve 4 years. Again, there's no limitation on the number of times they can be reelected. My salary here is off. I need to update that, but they make about 200 grand a year, I think, 175 or 180,000, something like that. Not a shabby salary, certainly. And they get some nice perks, right? They get the state provides the governor's mansion, and they get to live there rent free. They have cars, right, that they can use in state business. They have the state of Texas planes that they can use. They can fly across the state, right? If you're governor, you need to go to El Paso or Amarillo or something like that. They've got planes on hand that can be reserved by the governor and used to travel as necessary. They have their own staff, as most of the legislature. They have staff as well. They have a little bit bigger staff because they're managing all of the state agencies in Texas. So they're going to have a staff that can interface with all those agencies and work with the governor. As with that, having that car and that plane, they have a travel budget that lets them reimburse the state out of their budget for how they use those, how they travel about the state. Most of the time, to be honest, you're going to see governors traveling commercial if they're leaving the state of Texas, unless there's something that comes up that's real quick, or they've got to take a large amount of staff with them or something. Then they'll utilize the state planes to travel around. It's not. They don't have what I'm trying to say is they don't have a plane assigned to them. We have a set of planes, and they can reserve and use those planes, but they don't have. There's not governor airplane. It's not like the president where you get Air Force One. It's a full state resource, and other folks can use it as well, but the governor usually gets first dibs on it, which is a nice perk, right? I mean, so there's some nice elements to having this position, getting in this position. What have historically our governors look like. None of this is probably going to surprise you, that overwhelmingly our governors have been Anglo, right? Men mostly, and of a certain age, right? The uh, the average age has probably gone up a bit since we've had um, uh, both Perry and Abbott in office for so long, right? But so that's the history of what our governors have looked like. The other thing that matters here is that most of them have been very well educated individuals that have run and achieved this office, especially in the last 50 to 75 years, right? They've had bachelor's degrees. Most of them have been attorneys, have their law degree. Um, Most of the major universities are represented in the sense of having a governor come out of their student body. UT has the most. Texas A&M's had one. Baylor's had a couple, right? So those are what you're looking at as far as the universities in Texas that turn out prospective governors. The other thing here is that we have to note is demographics of religion. Most of our governors have been Protestant. Currently, though, we have a Catholic governor, so it's not exclusionary in that sense, right? There have been other religions reflected here, but the dominance is Protestantism in Texas, and so it's not surprising that most of our governors that have served have been Protestant. Most of the folks that get elected to governor, their past experience is one of serving in government. And they usually have some external experience prior to government where they were, fairly well rewarded. They're attorneys or business owners or something like that. And so they come into the position usually with means of their own, and then they get into government service, state service. They work their way up either out of the legislature, out of executive service, maybe out of some other state-wide elected office like the attorney general or lieutenant governor, and then stair step their way up to then eventually running for governor. So almost all of them have some previous elected experience in that sense, which is probably on par a very useful thing as experience to have, that your governor knows how the legislature works, knows how the state agency works, knows about the budgeting process, right? That kind of background is going to be incredibly useful for someone that gets elected governor. There are plenty of experts around. If we elected someone with no previous governmental service experience, they'd be able to do the job. Certainly, their run up to being effective would probably be a little bit longer, right? And they'd have to rely upon people to kind of move them in the direction they want to go in the proper procedures, but they'd get there. Okay, so let's move forward real quick and talk about the different roles the office of governor has, right? And that the governor gets to participate in. The first role of governor is chief of state. This is means they're the official head. They're the face of the state of Texas, politically speaking. They're going to meet with other governors that visit the state of Texas. If the president visits the state of Texas, any foreign dignitaries that will come into Texas, right? The governor's going to be the person probably meeting with them. They're going to be the face of the state of Texas. The other thing is when you're elected governor of Texas, you're automatically, as governors in all the states are, a member of the National Governors Association, which meets on a regular basis, and is exactly what it says it is. It is an association of all the governors in the United States, and that's a particularly important association to engage with, because as a governor, you show up there and you've got concerns and issues, problems, and all of the governors showing up there do. And this is an opportunity to see what other states are doing that have the same issues, concerns, or problems that your state has, and to study that and see what's being effective other places, and to try to ascertain whether maybe bringing a policy practice from one state to Texas would make sense or not. Also, you're there, right, sharing your experience as a governor in the state of Texas that might be useful to other governors in their states. And so it's a very useful organization. It also serves as a way for governors to kind of serve at a national level. There's going to be a lot of attention put on governors functioning within the National Governors Association. And it could be the way that a governor is planning to possibly make a run for a federal office, even presidency. Bill Clinton used this as one of the ways to get his name out and known prior to running for president. Was he was the president of the National Governors Association as governor of Arkansas, right? And so he got to talk with governors from all over the state, all over the country, and use that interaction to kind of plan where he was going to go. And other governors can do that as well. So this is the first role of governor, is to be the official right leader of the state that reaches out and engages with other people from other states, nations, or our nation. The second role is to be commander in chief of the state militia. Now, we have both the Texas National Guard and we have, and this is somewhat unique, a state militia, right? The Texas State Guard. And the governor has a role in both of those. The Texas National Guard is run by a director that is appointed by the governor. And it can be, right, is the interface from the state to these federal troops and the National Guard. And the governors of all the states have some authority to call up and use National Guard as a organizing force within their state. And so Texas governor has that authority as well. But we also have the Texas State Guard, which is a state militia of volunteers, and that is fully under the control of the governor. So these folks, most of them past military or past police or even current, and they volunteer their time to be in the State Guard and to be responding as the governor needs them to. My experience talking to folks that have been in this is that almost always they are the resource that the governor is going to reach out and tap when they need organized boots on the ground real quick. They'll call these volunteers up. These folks will organize, right? They meet and they do what they practice how they need to, and they go and they were directed by the governor to solve issues. And I think the last time I remember being in the loop on this was the Rio Grande was flooding downtown El Paso, and the governor called up the Texas State Militia and sent them to El Paso to help, right, the emergency groups in El Paso do whatever needed to be done to try to stem the flooding. And my boss was a member, and so he went off to El Paso. And when he came back, I said, "Hey, Frank, what'd you do for the last couple of weeks?" He goes, "I've been shoveling sand into sandbags for 2 weeks." And this is, a fairly highly placed individual in state government, but he went off and filled sandbags because that's what the governor needed, the boots on the ground to do. So it's a kind of unique role. Most states don't have their own state militia that answers to the governor, but Texas does. Okay, I think this is probably a good place to stop for the day. I'll let you guys out a little bit early. Remember, tonight your quizzes are due. Tonight your discussion for Unit 1 is due. Remember, the Unit 1 discussion is a political topic out there that you need to answer. It's not the introductory discussion that you did at the beginning of the semester, right? And you need to, uh, in the discussion one, you need to fully answer the discussion question, and then part two is to engage with one of your peers and help their answer become a better answer, right? Do some analysis, do some logical thought on it, and then help their answer become better. Those are the two elements that are going to be graded in the discussion. And then get that discussion done before the end of the day, get your quizzes turned in before the end of the day, and then at midnight, exam one window should open and it should be available for the next 48 hours and close at 11:59 on Friday night. Any questions or concerns before we call it a day? Uh, they're based mainly on the book, the textbook, right? So the test can be both, but the quizzes are textbook quizzes. And again, the quizzes are a prime element of what you need to be studying for this exam. Maribel, I see your hand up.
Yes. So would you say like answer respond to somebody's quote answer and make it better? Like how do we do that? Because
How
I've
do
been
you help
reading it.
somebody do,
Yeah, because I've been reading a few and I don't know how I would help to make it better.
well, ideally, right, whatever the question is, you should be able to go do a little bit of textbook work or research work and become right well versed in the possible answers to that question. And then as you're reading their question or their answer, right, you're trying to identify, well, they said this and they said that, but this third part would be, if they would write that, would make it an even stronger answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you're going to try to identify possibly oversight or something like that, or something that's not clear, and help them clarify or add more so that their question, so their answer to the question is a stronger answer. And somebody might be doing that to yours as well, right?
Yeah.
So the don't be mean, right?
Yeah.
Um, the point of this is to kind of get you thinking um, from outside just your own perspective, looking at other people's work and trying to make it better, right? You're making suggestions to them, positive suggestions that will help them. And then that may, right, help them the next time they do it, they'll start looking at some of the things a little differently or whatever. But all of us have different experiences, all of us have different ideas, and this is a way for you to not just answer a question, but to think about uh, other people's answers and see what's good or bad about them. And you can certainly, in your answer, give them a little praise for what you think is good. But the critical part of this analysis is to give them something that they haven't seen or talked about themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. If we go over the time limit on the quizzes, what will happen to the grade of the quiz? So I will get when I'm working through them, it shows me which questions were answered after the timeline, right after the time expired. And so, generally speaking, you'll get all of the credit for the ones that were done prior to the expiration. You won't get credit for the ones done after the timeline expired. And that's something that I um, have to do individually for each one. So it will automatically grade all of them, even if they're late. And I will go back and after the deadline, I'll go back and review them to see what the late looked like and see right and make a call on that. All right. No other questions? Okay, so I think that I had cleared that up in the syllabus by, right, showing you Unit 1 and showing you each of the book titles that are covered in each unit, right? So you should be able to look at the syllabus and see the 3 chapter titles that correspond to the chapter titles in the book. The book calls its chapters units. I don't know why. I've never seen that anywhere else. Usually a unit is some segment that has multiple chapters in it, but that's not how they did it. But the units are chapters. So this test is over chapters or units 1, 2, and 3, which is the Texas history and political experience chapter, the Constitution and federalism chapter, and the legislature chapter. Excellent. Glad it got cleared up. Okay. Anything else? All right, guys, let's call it a day. And I'll hopefully see all of your exams coming in without any problem. Do make sure your Respondus browser is working, and then do make sure that that's the browser you use to access the exam. Right? Most of the problems that occur in these kind of online situations are people try to access the exam with the normal browser that they use, and it won't work that way. It'll almost certainly, if you do that, it'll ask you for a password or a passcode. So the first thing there is to make sure you're in the Respondus browser, right? And get that browser open and running and make sure it's working today, and don't wait till tomorrow. All right, you guys have a good one, and I'll talk to you guys again next week, and look forward to seeing a lot of good grades come in on Thursday and Friday.